Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the hidden and legendary bosses of Skyrim. The creatures, warriors, and ancient horrors that Skyrim never told you about, never pointed you toward, and never wanted you to find. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight. And subscribe if this helps you sleep. There is a place on the northeastern coast of Solstheim where the land gives out in a tangle of frost-bitten rock and grey kelp-slicked stone, where the sea pushes hard against the shoreline in long, cold rolls that smell of brine and ice and something older than the island itself. The dock is called North Shore Landing, and it looks, at a glance, like nothing at all. A forgotten jetty, a few rotting planks, the suggestion that people once moored here and then thought better of it. Most players who sail to Solstheim for the first time have their eyes fixed on the horizon toward Raven Rock, or on the ash-choked skyline further south, where red mountain smoke smears itself across the blue in a permanent bruise. Nobody looks twice at North Shore Landing. That is their mistake, because down among the rocks, lurking in the shallows between the seaweed and the cold slap of the waves, there lives a creature that Bethesda named with a certain quiet fondness. His name is Old Salty. He is a mud crab. And he is not just any mud crab. The first thing that sets him apart is the name itself. In a game that is absolutely stuffed with unnamed generic creatures. Wolves, bears, mud crabs, by the dozen. The act of giving something a specific name is a deliberate choice. There are only two named mud crabs in all of Skyrim. One is Pincer, a tiny harmless pet that a child might bring home if you live in a house with a hearth, and a little one who wanders. The other is Old Salty, and he is anything but harmless, and he is anything but small. He is notably larger than the mud crabs that cluster around him, heavier in the shell, thicker in the claw. He moves with the slow, rolling confidence of something that has lived in these shallows for longer than anyone around him. He has claimed this stretch of coast in the way that old things sometimes do, not through aggression alone, but through sheer persistence, through the quiet authority of having outlasted everything else. But here is where it gets interesting. When you kill Old Salty, if you kill him, which requires a bit more effort than dispatching his ordinary kin, you can loot his body, and what you find on a mud crab tells you something about that mud crab. On Old Salty, you find the expected chitin, the standard components, and then you find a tankard, and 35 gold coins, and a random gem, glittering incongruously inside a creature that was supposed to be simple fauna. The tankard and the gold are not accidents. They are a reference, a long-running joke in Elder Scrolls history, and one that rewards players who have been with the series since Morrowind. Back in that older game set centuries before Skyrim on the Ash continent across the water, there was a legendary Easter egg that became genuinely beloved. Hidden on a small island, indistinguishable from every other mud crab you'd kicked aside for 20 hours of play, sat a unique creature that players eventually discovered could be traded with. The mud crab merchant of Morrowind held 800 gold and sold and bought goods. More gold than almost any merchant in the entire game. He sold alcoholic drinks. He said nothing. He just squatted in the shallows, looking ancient and satisfied. And if you knew the right thing to do, he was secretly one of the most valuable contacts on the continent. Old Salty is Bethesda, nodding across the centuries at that same creature. The tankard echoes the alcohol connection. The gold echoes the merchant's legendary wealth. Even Old Salty's position in the shallows of a remote northern shoreline mirrors the spirit of the original Easter egg, a joke hidden in plain sight, a reward for people who look closely, who don't just chase quest markers and main story beats, but who stop and peer into the tide pools. He is placed at North Shore Landing specifically because the landing is easy to miss, just easy enough to filter out the players who are always in a hurry. There is something genuinely charming about the mythology that builds up around Old Salty among those who find him. Is he the same mud crab, or a descendant? The mud crab merchant was said to be unnaturally wealthy and wise for what he was. Old Salty, with his coins and his tankard, and his stubborn territorial defenses, feels like he is carrying something forward. A lineage, a tradition, a long, slow line of mud crabs who somehow ended up richer and meaner than they had any right to be. The 35 gold could be read as the modest savings of a creature who once had 800 and spent most of it across the centuries in ways we can't account for. The tankard could be one he's had since before Vivek was a god and Skyrim was young. The geographic placement on Solstheim adds another quiet layer to the reference. Morrowind, the game where the original mud crab merchant lived, was set on Vardenfell, the Ash Island province dominated by Red Mountain. Solstheim sits between Vardenfell and Skyrim, a liminal place, and the Dragonborn DLC uses that liminality deliberately throughout. Old Salty is not in Skyrim proper. He is in the place that is neither fully Morrowind nor fully Skyrim, and that middle space is precisely where a reference like this makes the most sense. Too far from the original home to be a coincidence, close enough that the ancestry feels plausible. It is also worth sitting with the fact that he is hostile. The mudcrab merchant of Morrowind was friendly, passive, willing to trade. Old Salty attacks. He is not interested in commerce. Whatever happened between the gentle tradesman of the Third Era and this armoured shore guardian of the Fourth, the disposition did not survive the centuries intact. Perhaps this is what several hundred years of living at the edge of the map does to a creature. Perhaps the isolation of North Shore Landing, the cold and the wind and the absence of other people stopping to trade, turned a merchant into a hermit and a hermit into something that fights first and considers commerce later or never. There is a miniature tragedy in that reading. A creature that was once one of Tamriel's stranger points of interest, quietly running a small business in the shallows, slowly hardening over generations into something that treats every visitor as a threat. What makes Old Salty feel special is precisely that he requires nothing from you. There is no quest to find him. No NPC sends you to North Shore Landing with a rumour about a strange crab. No journal entry updates when you loot his body. He simply exists, quietly and stubbornly, on his stretch of cold shore, waiting to be noticed. And in a game that frequently announces its hidden things with quest markers and tracking arrows, that restraint feels almost respectful, like the developers trusted that some players would simply wander to the edge of the map and look down. His spawn at North Shore Landing is not always guaranteed. During the Dragonborn questline, when Thalmor agents and a character named Ankarian arrive at the dock to establish their own presence, Old Salty sometimes vacates the area. He has been displaced before. He has been pushed off his shoreline by forces larger than himself, by the same kind of political machinery that grinds over everything in Solstheim. But he respawns. He comes back. Because Old Salty is not the kind of creature that goes away permanently. He goes quiet for a while, and then he returns to his rocks, and the sea goes on, and the coins are back in his shell, where they belong. The respawn mechanic carries its own meaning here. In a game where many significant creatures, Lord Tusk, the Ebony Warrior, Karstaag, do not return once defeated, Old Salty's ability to come back after death is a feature of what he represents. He is not a boss in the traditional sense. He is an Easter egg, a cameo, a piece of fond institutional memory. Easter eggs do not die. They persist across editions and remasters and sequels because they carry something that the game's architects wanted to preserve, regardless of practical consequence. Old Salty respawning is the game saying, this one matters differently, not because he is powerful. Any competent character kills him easily, but because the idea of him matters. The reference matters. The kindness of the nod across 20 years of the franchise matters. He comes back because the thing he represents cannot be permanently ended. There is something fitting about a creature like this, sitting at the edge of the map, at the edge of an island that is itself an edge, caught between Morrowind and Skyrim, between the old world and the new. Old Salty lives in that margin. He has always lived in margins, and he carries in his chitinous old body the memory of a game that came before, a reference so quiet and so fond that it doesn't announce itself at all. You either know or you don't. You either stop and crouch down in the shallows of North Shore Landing, or you sail past and never think about it again. He is the king of a very small kingdom. Cold water, kelp, 35 gold, and a tankard that has never been explained. And a name that belongs in the full weight of what names mean in these games, to something that has earned it. Lord Tusk and the blood on the rocks. East of Skull Village, the coastline of Solstheim breaks apart into a scatter of small islands trailing out into the grey sea like stones thrown by a giant's hand. Most of these islands are unremarkable, wind-scoured, populated by nothing more dramatic than the occasional clump of snow breeze or a seabird that startles as you pass. But one of them, sitting just off the eastern coast, is different. It is called Hawker Island, and the game marks it with a small label and no quest, no urgency, no reason to go there that the game explicitly provides. If you do go, if you hire a boat or swim the cold channel, or simply wade in until the current takes you, you arrive on a flat, rocky coastline populated by hawkers. Hawkers are Solstheim's most reliable comic relief. They are enormous walrus-like creatures that shuffle and bellow along the shore, their tusks jutting and ridiculous, their bodies round and slow, their aggression more theatrical than genuinely threatening. They charge, they miss, they bellow again. Killing them feels almost like an apology. Nobody comes to Hawker Island for the hawkers, and yet something on this island has been killing people. Hawkers are worth pausing on briefly, because their presence in such numbers on this particular island is itself a clue. They are territorial creatures, more aggressive than their slow shuffle suggests, capable of dealing meaningful damage in groups. A typical coastal patrol along Solstheim shores will encounter them in clusters of 2 or 3, manageable, more nuisance than threat. Hawker Island has significantly more. They have been here long enough to build a population, which means the island has been undisturbed long enough for that population to establish itself. No regular human activity, no fishing camps, no trade routes stopping here. The dead reavers on the beach are the most recent evidence of disturbance, and they are clearly recent. Before them, the island was apparently left alone for a very long time. Whatever drove people away in the first place did so thoroughly enough that the hawkers multiplied in their absence, and Lord Tusk grew to his current size in the peace of a territory nobody else wanted. On the southern shore, where the island's curve faces back toward the mainland, there is an overturned longboat. It lies half in the water, hull up, the wood bleached and salt split, and beside it sits a journal. Seiden's journal. Satan was a member of a scouting party that made the mistake of choosing this island for an outpost. His words, written with the careful hand of a man still trying to process what he saw. Describe stopping here, describing it as peaceful, as remote. Peaceful, remote. The word you notice is peaceful because of what comes next in those pages. The screams of the others who went ahead, the sound of something wet and enormous happening further along the shore. The blood. His final note is that he can't even describe what he saw, but that he will never forget it. The blood. Gods, the blood. Follow the shoreline north. The regular hawkers are there, big and stupid and slow, giving you sideways looks as you pass. But keep going, past the dead reavers arranged on the rocks. And the dead reavers are worth pausing for, because these were armed people, fighters, and they are not just dead but arranged in the postures of things that were caught unaware, things that died fast. Keep going north and uphill, and you will find a blood trail. It is real, visible, a dark smear across the pale stone going up and up toward the high part of the island. And at the top of that trail, surrounded by skulls half buried in the permafrost, resting there with the settled authority of something that has been in this exact spot for years and does not intend to move, sits Lord Tusk. He is twice the size of a normal hawker, not slightly larger, not meaningfully bigger, twice the size, an absurd and magnificent escalation of a creature you already found large. His health pool is more than double a standard hawker's. His stamina is significantly greater. He hits harder. And when you approach, when he decides that you are a threat worth acknowledging, the other hawkers on the island come with him. They are his court. They follow their king into battle with the same shuffling, bellowing commitment that regular hawkers bring to every fight. Except this time, there is a creature behind them that looks like something out of the stories sailors tell each other at the end of a long voyage. The skulls around Lord Tusk are the detail that matters. They are there on purpose. They were placed by the developers to tell a story without a word of dialogue, without a journal entry, without a quest marker. Something has been bringing things up to this hilltop and leaving what remains of them. The dead reavers on the beach, the screaming scouting party that Sardan survived. These were not accidents. Lord Tusk has been here for a long time, and anything that wanders onto his island with weapons and armor gets added to the ring of skulls around his resting place. And yet there is a second discovery on Hawker Island that goes entirely unnoticed by most players who fight their way up through the blood and the skulls and defeat the enormous creature at the top of the hill. Past Lord Tusk, wedged into the rock behind where he rests, is a unique weapon. It is a mace called Hawksbane, and it deals extra damage specifically to hawkers. It is a weapon built for the specific purpose of killing the exact type of creature you just fought to retrieve it. The irony is layered carefully. To reach Hawksbane, you had to go through Lord Tusk, who is the most powerful hawker in the game. The weapon that best kills his kind was hidden in his territory, behind his body, a prize for anyone willing to fight the king of his species on his own ground. Whoever left it there either had a very dark sense of humor or died before they could use it. The Hawksbane's presence also implies a history. Someone brought that weapon to Hawker Island. Someone made the crossing with the mace specifically enchanted for this purpose, which means someone already knew about Lord Tusk, or knew about the problem this island represented, and came prepared. They did not succeed, or they did succeed, and left the weapon behind, and Lord Tusk's skull collection continued growing in the time since. Both possibilities are unsettling in their own way. What makes Lord Tusk genuinely memorable as an encounter, beyond the difficulty spike, beyond the sheer surprise of a hawker, that can actually kill you if you are underleveled and overconfident, is the completeness of the story told around him. The journal, the overturned boat, the dead reavers, the blood trail, the skulls, the weapon hidden behind him. None of this is part of a quest. None of it advances anything. It exists simply to reward the player who was curious enough to cross a channel to visit an island the game never explicitly told them to visit. That is the kind of storytelling Bethesda does best when they are operating at their quietest. Lord Tusk does not respawn after death. When he is gone, he is gone. The skulls remain. The blood trail remains. Hawksbane can be picked up. And Hawker Island returns to being a place where the regular hawkers shuffle and bellow in the cold, their king no longer among them, the throne of rock and bone at the island's peak belonging to no one, the sea going on and on in every direction and the wind not caring at all about the legend that just ended. That lack of respawn is itself a design statement. Most enemies in Skyrim return after a period of time. Dungeons reset. Creatures repopulate their territories. The world is designed to persist in its difficulty regardless of what the player does to it. Lord Tusk does not follow this rule. His death is permanent, which elevates the encounter into a category that most random wildlife encounters never reach. You are not clearing a spawn point. You are ending a reign. The island will be simpler after you leave it, more navigable, less likely to feature a blood trail at the top of the hill. The hawkers will continue their shuffle and bellow, and they will be fine, in the way that subjects are sometimes fine, when an overwhelming ruler is removed. But the specific character of the place, that quality of old violence, of territory defended by something that has been winning for years, leaves with him. Hawker Island after Lord Tusk is just an island with hawkers. Before, it was something's kingdom. Karstaag, the frost giant of the Shattered Keep. There are 200 years of ruin between the creature you can fight in Skyrim's Dragonborn DLC and the creature who once ruled the ice of Solstheim's northern coast with the authority of something older than the island's human history. 200 years of collapse and silence and the slow reclamation of what had been carefully built. And at the end of all that ruin, if you are patient enough, if you pay attention to the right details and make the right choices, you can summon him back. You can drag the ghost of Karstaag out of the long dark and face what he became. Castle Karstaag was something, once. Not beautiful in the way human castles aspire to beauty. Not dressed in carved stone and banners and the aesthetic machinery of kingdoms, but massive in the way that natural features are massive. It was built of ice. It was a frost giant's castle, and frost giants do not build the way men or elves build. They build to last, which means they build large and cold. And the castle that bore Karstaag's name was a monument to a kind of power that does not bother explaining itself. He ruled over a tribe of reeklings from this place, the small, blue-skinned goblin-like creatures that pepper Solstheim's landscape in the present day. And there was an uneasy truce between him and the Skull people who shared the island. Not peace exactly, not friendship, a mutual acknowledgement that the other existed and that the cost of changing that arrangement outweighed the benefit. In the Third Era, during events recorded in the Morrowind expansion Blood Moon, Karstaag's story took a turn that had nothing to do with his own choices. Hircine, the Daedric prince of the Hunt, gathered prey for his great game. Karstaag was selected. He was taken from his castle and brought to the Mortrag Glacier, used as a participant in a hunt that mortals had no standing to refuse. He survived the maze. He reached the central chamber. He was killed there, not by the hunt's natural conclusion, but by the Nerevarine, another participant who had their own agenda. The glacier collapsed. Karstaag's remains were buried in the ice. There is something important to pause on in the details of how Karstaag died. He was taken by Hircine specifically because he was significant, because the blood moon prophecy that governed the hunt called for worthy prey, and Karstaag was considered worthy. Frost giants are, in most corners of Tamriel's history, solitary and barely documented creatures. They occupy a strange taxonomic position in the game's lore, categorized as giants, but evidently distinct from the standard giants who herd mammoths across Skyrim's plains, where standard giants are enormous but comprehensible, creatures with camps and paintings and a clear relationship to the world around them. Frost giants occupy a more mythological register. There are out-of-game developer notes that refer to frost giants as Karstaags or Karstaag men, suggesting that Karstaag may not simply be a name for one individual, but a word that has become a category. A name that accumulated around one creature so completely it began to describe the type. This is not established in any in-game text, so it remains the realm of developer context rather than settled lore. But it hints at something interesting, that this particular frost giant may have been significant enough, old enough, or legendary enough that his name became the noun for what he was. Hircine chose him as prey because prey that can fight back is the point of the hunt. Karstaag made it to the central chamber. He survived what the maze threw at him. And then the Nerevarine killed him, which is either a betrayal of the hunt spirit or its ultimate expression, depending on your view of what Hircine actually values. Either way, Karstaag died doing something worthy of the attention of a Daedric prince, and his ghost, 200 years later, arrives in your courtyard with that same energy still in him. What happened next is told entirely through silence and archaeology. The castle fell into ruin. The Reeklings stayed. Reeklings always stay. They are the most persistently territorial creatures on the island. And they occupied the crumbling remains of their dead master's home, turning a frost giant's throne room into a cramped tribal warren. The UESP notes that Karstaag's skeletal remains were recovered and placed upon his throne through unknown means. The game doesn't say by whom or when or how. What the game does show you is that by the time the Dragonborn arrives, the bones are there, arranged on the throne, an act of preservation that could just as plausibly belong to the Reeklings as to any conscious effort. The skull, however, is elsewhere, lodged in the ice wall of a glacial cave to the northeast, separated from the rest of the remains in ways that, again, the game declines to explain. Whether it was moved deliberately, lost in the collapse of the glacier that buried Karstaag's original body, or separated for reasons connected to the Reekling's own rituals, is left open. Your discovery of this begins not with the castle, but with the cave. Glacial Cave sits northeast of Sering's Watch on Solheim's northern rim, and nothing about it announces itself as important. It is small. It is cold. It is occupied by a handful of hostile Reeklings who guard it, with the possessive fury of creatures that have been told by neither words nor reason to give up their post. Push through them, go all the way to the back of the cave, and embedded in the ice wall at the deepest point, lodged there like something placed with care, or like something that fell and was never retrieved, is a skull. It is large, unnaturally large, too big for any human or elven head, the proportions of something that was never meant to move through the world at normal scale. This is Karstaag's skull, The skull sits in your inventory as an item with no quest marker attached, no journal update, no explanation. Most players who find it have no idea what it is for. They carry it around for a while, maybe, wondering if it will trigger something, and eventually place it in a chest in their home and forget it. The game gives you nothing, no hint, no voice from beyond suggesting you take it somewhere. The discovery of what the skull does requires either stumbling upon the ruins of Castle Karstaag independently, or the kind of deep lore-reading curiosity that leads players to follow threads without a clear reason. Castle Karstaag Ruins sits on the island's northwestern edge, reachable either through a master-level locked front gate or through the Castle Karstaag Caverns, a sprawling, reekling-infested network of ice tunnels that winds under and through what remains of the structure. The caverns are no casual passage. They are full, genuinely full, of reeklings at every level, on every bridge, filling every tunnel with small bodies and loud hostility. Making it through them and into the ruins above is itself an accomplishment. The courtyard of the ruins is open to the sky, which in this part of Solstheim means open to a sky that is pale and cold and feels close, like a ceiling that forgot to stay up. In the center of the courtyard is a throne. It is enormous, scaled to something enormous, and the reeklings scattered around it have clearly been using it as a place of reverence. They circle it. They tend to it. This was their king's chair, and they have kept faith with it across 200 years in the way that simple creatures sometimes keep faith. Not with understanding, but with repetition, with the animal memory of a gesture that once meant something. The reeklings themselves carry an interesting subtext in this encounter. They are small, primitive, not powerful in any individual sense, and yet they have maintained the ruins of their king's castle across 2 centuries without the king present, without any instruction, without any reason. The game provides, except the momentum of loyalty, outlasting its object. When they attack you as you approach the throne, they are not attacking an invader in the conventional sense. They are defending a sacred site, a place that has been at the center of their tribal identity since before any living reekling was born. They do not know Karstaag. They know the throne. They know that the throne matters, and that strangers who approach it do not belong there. This is, in miniature, the entire logic of religious warfare. The object of reverence no longer present, but the protection of its memory generating violence across generations. Place the skull on the throne. The ruins shake. The air in the courtyard changes. The cold intensifies in that specific way that cold intensifies when something is using it as a medium, when frost is not weather but intention. And then Karstaag appears. Not the living giant of the Third Era, but the ghost of him. Spectral, enormous, semi-transparent in the way the Solcairn's inhabitants are semi-transparent, but massive and real enough in every way that matters. He has horns. He has a club the size of a small tree. He has a frost cloak that radiates cold damage in a radius that extends far enough to punish anyone who thought keeping their distance was a safe strategy. He summons ice wraiths mid-fight if given the opportunity. He shakes the ground with every step. When he stomps, a full-body ground shake attack. It is powerful enough to launch the player across the courtyard, tumbling and stunned while he advances. He is a level 90 enemy. Karstaag is the strongest optional boss in the entirety of Skyrim. Stronger than the Ebony Warrior, stronger than any Dragon Priest, stronger than anything the main game or its DLC throws at you in the course of normal questing. He exists at this level not to serve a narrative function, not to block a path, not to guard a crucial reward. He exists because the question was posed and answered in the clearest possible terms. What if we gave the most dedicated players a genuine monster, a creature that demanded everything they had learned over hundreds of hours, and we hid it behind a puzzle that required them to carry a skull across the island and trust a hunch? The answer is Karstaag. The answer is a fight that some players cannot win on their first attempt, no matter how well prepared they believe themselves to be. He has a 75% resistance to shock damage, which eliminates one of the most reliable damage types in the player's toolkit. He regenerates health at a rate that means sustained damage output is not optional. You cannot whittle him down over a long, careful fight because he will heal faster than you can chip away at him on lower difficulties. He is immune to frost, which is the element you would naturally reach for against a giant made of cold and spectral ice. Every layer of his design pushes back against the instinct to play it safe. He rewards aggression because he punishes patience. The shout marked for death, applied repeatedly, counters his regeneration by reducing his maximum health, a specific counter to a specific problem, the kind of tactical knowledge that separates players who have truly engaged with the game's systems from those who have only passed through them. The three-use limitation on Summon Karstaag is the most important thing about the reward. The game is careful to make it clear that this is not an unlimited resource, not something you can build a playstyle around, not a follower or a permanent ability. You have 3 opportunities to call him. After that, he is gone. This forces a decision each time. Is this the fight worthy of using one of 3? Is this enemy or this moment significant enough to deserve Karstaag's presence? It transforms the reward from a power into a currency, and currencies are spent thoughtfully when there are only 3 of them. Most players in practice find that they save all 3 charges against enemies they want to test Karstaag against, either great dragons or other legendary bosses, or simply standing on a mountain and calling him out into the open air to see what he looks like when the sky is above him and he is not constrained to a ruined courtyard. He belongs to the cold. There is something right about releasing him into it once before the 3 uses expire. The reward when he finally falls, when the ghost collapses and the ice cloak dissipates and the courtyard goes quiet in the aftermath, is a power. Not a weapon or an item, but a power. Summon Karstaag. Usable 3 times before it is gone forever. You can call the ghost of the frost giant you just barely survived fighting and aim him at enemies. Watch him tear through whatever you direct him toward with the same terrible force he turned against you. 3 times, then he is done. Then the debt is paid or the alliance is exhausted, and Karstaag rests again. That limitation is part of the statement. He is not a pet. He is not a permanent companion. He is a force you earned the right to use, briefly, before the terms expire. The Skaal maintained their uneasy truce with him for centuries. You defeated him and earned something less than a truce and more than a victory. You earned 3 moments in which the most dangerous thing on the island belongs, temporarily, to you. Sigdis Gauldurson and the Lake of Forgotten Crime. There is an island in Lake Goer, east of Ivarstead, that sits quiet in the water without announcing what it contains. The island does not look dangerous from the road. You can see it from the bridge. A low hump of stone with some mossy upright rocks, and a doorway cut into a small mound, indistinguishable at a glance from the dozens of similar Nordic barrow entrances scattered across Skyrim's landscape. Most players, the first time they pass through Ivarstead, on the way up the 7,000 steps to High Hrothgar, do not stop. They are on their way somewhere. They are answering a dragon's call. The island can wait. But Geirmund's Hall is one of Skyrim's most elaborately hidden crimes. and Sigdis Gauldurson is the man at the center of it. The legend of the Gauldur family is written in fragments across Skyrim's books and ruins, and none of those fragments agree entirely on what happened. The broadest outline, pieced together from the book Lost Legends and from the research notes of a dead adventurer named Danis Valen, found deep inside Folgunthur, goes like this. Galdur was an archmage of genuine power, well known and respected throughout the courts of King Harold and the Jarls of Skyrim in the early First Era. A man whose counsel was sought even by Isgrimor's heirs, whose gifts with magic were matched by his personal decency. He had 3 sons. The sons were not like the father. They were ambitious in the way that the children of powerful men sometimes are, not content to inherit a legacy, but determined to steal a shortcut to it. One night they killed their father in his sleep and divided his amulet, a piece of jewelry that had served as the source of much of his power, into 3 fragments that they kept separately, so that no single brother held an advantage over the others. Lost Legends, the book that first flags the Gauldur conspiracy for players willing to read in-game texts, is itself a careful piece of literary construction. Its author offers 2 competing theories. Either the sons killed Gauldur out of jealousy for his power, or it was King Harold himself who gave the order, motivated by that same jealousy. The book presents both with equal weight, declining to settle the matter. The ambiguity is pointed. The records were destroyed to prevent this exact conversation, and the book acknowledges working from fragments rather than history. That the book exists at all, that somebody preserved even the rumor, suggests that the cover-up was never fully complete, that knowledge, like the undead, has a tendency to resist burial. The writ of sealing you find on Sigdis's body after defeating him is a document issued by whatever authority pursued the brothers, a formal declaration that the named individual has been sealed in a tomb as punishment for their crimes. It reads as bureaucratic in the way that old crimes are sometimes bureaucratic. The machinery of state processing an atrocity through standard paperwork, the stamp and the seal and the official language of incarceration, making the murder of an archmage and the burning of villages into an administrative matter. The coldness of it is part of the horror. There is no rage in the writ of sealing. There is only procedure. What followed was catastrophe. Armed with power they had stolen rather than earned, the 3 brothers burned a path through the surrounding villages. They were not strategic, not careful, not the kind of people who understood that power requires restraint to last. They were simply violent with something enormous and new in their hands. King Harold sent Lord Geirmund, his personal battle mage, his archmage, to stop them. What that pursuit looked like across the landscape of early Skyrim is the kind of story that legends simplify. The brothers were separated, cornered, sealed. Their names were struck from the historical record. The incident was buried as thoroughly as they were, a state secret kept with the same totalitarian efficiency that uncomfortable truths are always kept. Not by destroying the memory, but by making the memory inaccessible. Sigdis was the last of the 3 brothers to be caught. He fought the hardest. According to Danis Valen's notes, the research compiled by the Dunmer scholar whose corpse you find in Folgunthur, Sigdis challenged Lord Geirmund to a duel at the end, knowing his opponent was honor-bound to accept. They clashed in battle, matched strength for strength, and the notes say they fell together on the field before Ivasted. Neither man survived the encounter. The tomb was built where they fell, and Geirmund's body was interred there as both honored dead and eternal jailer. The hall you enter is named for the man who died alongside the thing he was sent to stop. The entrance drops you into the dark through a pit in the center of the first chamber, a long fall into an underground lake that spreads wide and cold beneath the island, the torchlight catching the ripples as you surface. The architecture around you is ancient and wrong in the way that ancient Nordic tombs are wrong, built for things that should not still be present, maintained by the residual magic of a burial that was never meant to be a permanent solution. Draugr move in the corridors above the water. Frostbite spiders guard the deeper tunnels. The whole place carries the feeling of a building that knows it is holding something it was never equipped to hold. Garmund's body is in the dungeon alongside Sigdis. He is not sealed in a separate honor tomb somewhere above ground. He is here, in the wet dark, buried with the man he died to contain. There is something both heroic and grim in that. A battle mage of such stature that King Harold named a tomb after him, and yet the tomb is a prison. His body holds a physical key, the key to the inner door that leads to Sigdis. Whether his continued presence was designed to serve some magical function in maintaining the seal, or whether that detail simply reflects a practical choice to bury him where he fell, the game leaves to interpretation. What is clear is that Geirmund did not get to rest. He did not get to lie in state above the waterline with his deeds carved in stone and remembered by generations. He lies here with the man he gave his life to stop, useful past his death in the most literal sense. Even in the grave, still standing between Sigdis and the world above. Sigdis emerges from his sarcophagus in the lowest chamber, a flooded room where the water comes up in shifting mist from the floor, and wooden platforms rise in uneven levels from the dark. He rises without preamble. He does not speak. He does not need to. What he does instead is immediately brutally demonstrate why it took Lord Geirmund's life to stop him the first time. He teleports. He clones himself, creating two copies that are nearly indistinguishable from the original, except for a faint blue shimmer around the false versions. And he uses the chaos of three identical figures to sustain ranged attacks from safety, while the player wastes arrows and spells and shouts on targets that vanish the moment they take a hit. He knows all three words of unrelenting force. Every word, the full shout, the one that doesn't stagger but launches. He uses disarm, which can tear a weapon from your hand in the middle of a fight that already has you losing track of which Sigdis to target. He is, in the estimation of many players who encounter him without preparation, the most mechanically frustrating enemy in the base game. The Gauldur blackbow he carries absorbs magicka with every hit, a slow grinding drain that punishes mages specifically, the people most likely to rely on detection spells to identify the real Sigdis among his clones. There is something fitting in that. The weapon was made by men who understood what they were taking from their father, and Sigdis wielded it, knowing precisely what it could drain from an opponent. He faced one of Skyrim's greatest battle mages with this bow in his hands. They fell together, both of them, on the field before Ivarstead. The drain on your magicka pool during this fight is not just a mechanical challenge. It is an echo of the original crime. The moment the sons of Gauldur decided that the most useful thing about their father's power was what it let them take from others. When Sigdis finally falls, when you hit the real one enough times, when the clones vanish and the echoing underground chamber goes quiet, he drops the bow and a fragment of the Gauldur amulet, the piece that enhances stamina, the fragment that represents his share of the inheritance. The amulet alone cannot be used. It is not whole. It will sit in your inventory until you have hunted the other two brothers and found the means to reforge what the sons destroyed. The fragment is simultaneously reward and reminder. You found one of three things. The crime had three authors. The story is not over. Behind Sigdis's sarcophagus, an escape tunnel leads out to a small treasure room and then back to the island's surface, and you emerge into the daylight of Lake Gear with the weight of an old story resting in your pack. The lake is still. The island looks exactly as it did before you dropped into the dark beneath it. The 7,000 steps are still waiting in the direction of High Hrothgar. Nothing has changed, except that a 1,000-year-old secret is now your secret too, and the man who killed a battle mage and burned villages and got his name wiped from every record is gone again, back into the ground that tried and failed to hold him, this time for good. The Forbidden Legend quest does not end at Gaiman's Hall. It ends at Reachwater Rock, a flooded cave in the far reaches of the Reach, where the brothers, already defeated in their separate tombs, must be faced again together, their spirits summoned one final time by the magic of the place and the presence of all three amulet fragments. The Gauldur sons arrive in spectral form, and they must each be defeated again in sequence. And only then does the ghost of Gauldur himself appear, not to fight, but to reclaim what was taken from him, reforging the amulet from its fragments and returning it whole. It is one of the stranger moments in Skyrim's side quests. An archmage who has been dead for thousands of years performing a reconciliation ritual, not punishing the player for helping uncover the conspiracy, but quietly thanking them for finishing what his murder left unfinished. The Gauldur amulet in its complete form is genuinely remarkable. It boosts health, stamina, and magicka simultaneously. A piece of equipment that reflects the breadth of Gauldur's own power, rather than specializing in any single school. He was a man of total capability, and the amulet is evidence of it. The sons divided that capability because none of them could encompass the whole. Stamina for Sigdis, who fought at range and relied on speed. Magicka for Jirik, who favored destruction magic. Health for Mikrul, who waded into direct combat. They fractured their father's completeness into three partial inheritances, and none of the three pieces was as useful as the whole. That the quest rewards you with a reunified amulet is the game's clearest statement about what the sons lost when they chose ambition over patience. The cover-up that followed the brothers' deaths is also worth considering at length. King Harold did not simply seal the brothers in tombs. He struck their names from the records. He ordered that the legend of Gauldur be suppressed, that the incident be classified and buried and kept from the knowledge of future generations. The question of why is genuinely interesting. The brothers were caught, sealed, the threat neutralized. Why the additional step of erasure? The most plausible reading is that the existence of the story itself was considered dangerous. If the sons of Gauldur could kill their father and divide his power and nearly destroy the kingdom, then the story of how they did it was a blueprint. Suppressing the memory meant suppressing the method. The Forgemaster, last guardian of the Ethereum Forge. Deep in the Dawnguard DLC, there is a quest line that almost nobody follows, unless they stumble into it by accident or chase it specifically, and it leads to one of the most spectacular and overlooked boss encounters in the game. The quest is called Lost to the Ages, and it begins with a ghost. Arkhantums is a dwarven ruin in the mountains south of Markarth, and if you approach it at the right time, you will encounter the spirit of an elf named Katria, hovering at the entrance with the frustrated energy of someone who died too soon and knows it. She was an explorer, a scholar of dwarven culture, and she spent years tracking down the pieces of a puzzle that her research partner stole credit for after she died trying to solve it. That puzzle concerns something called Ethereum, a rare, luminescent, blue ore of extraordinary magical power that the ancient Dwemer mined in secret and used for purposes that were never fully documented before their disappearance. Katria knows where 4 shards of Ethereum are hidden, scattered across separate ruins, and she knows where those shards must be taken to be used. She will follow you as you collect them. A translucent companion with opinions and warnings and a personal stake in what you find at the end. Katria's presence throughout this questline transforms it from a treasure hunt into something more personal. She died in Arkanthams, trying to solve the puzzle that the Ethereum shards represented. Her body is still in the ruins. She can acknowledge it when you find it, that specific awful experience of encountering the physical evidence of your own death. Her research partner survived because he was not with her when the kinetic resonators triggered the earthquake, and he subsequently published her findings under his own name, which means her life's work exists in the world without her name attached to it. She is haunting these ruins not out of malice, but out of the very specific inability to let go that afflicts people who were on the verge of something important when they died. Lost to the Ages is, at its core, a story about an elf who deserved to finish what she started, and the player is the instrument through which she does. The end is the ruins of Bethalft, south of Ivarstead, another unremarkable patch of dwarven architecture that most players walk past without a second look. Inside is the Ethereum Forge. The Forge is not a room. It is an event. It is a space that the ancient Dwemer built around a literal river of magma, sunk deep into the earth beneath the ruins, the heat coming up through the stone in waves that warp the air and make the shadows jump. The forge itself rises above a magma channel, surrounded by dwarven machinery of such age and complexity that the purpose of most of it has been lost even to scholars. The Dwemer built things to last, built automatons that still walk and attack 4,000 years after their creators vanished. But they also built things to be defended. The Ethereum Forge was their greatest metallurgical achievement. They were not going to leave it unprotected. You fight through the chamber's standard defenders first. Dwarven spiders, dwarven spheres, the usual mechanical hierarchy of constructs that escalate in size and fury as you press deeper into their territory. These are difficult enough. And then, when the last of the standard constructs falls, when the room should logically be clear, the magma behind the forge begins to move. The Forgemaster rises from the lava. The entrance is extraordinary. It does not sprint or leap. It rises, the way something enormous rises when it has been waiting below the surface for a very long time and has all the time in the world, and the lava peels off it in slow sheets as it stands to full height. Parts of its armor and its frame are still glowing, not the regular dwarven gold bronze, but something closer to orange-white, metal that hasn't cooled yet, metal that has been submerged so long it has absorbed the heat of the lava as a property. This is a dwarven centurion, the most powerful automaton classification in dwarven engineering, but it is not a normal centurion. It is nearly twice the size, and instead of the steam breath that regular centurions use, the hot, scalding cloud that damages and blinds, the Forgemaster breathes fire, not steam, fire, a direct dragon-style breath attack that the dwarven engineers either designed specifically for the forge's environment or that happened to the machine over centuries of immersion in magma, the heat rewriting what it was built to do. The Forgemaster's emergence from the lava is one of those encounters that the game announces with silence rather than fanfare. The music does not swell. There is no dramatic cutscene. The lava simply starts moving, and then you understand what is in it, and the understanding arrives in your stomach before it arrives in your mind. This is the distinction between a boss that is introduced and a boss that is revealed. The Forgemaster is revealed, which is more frightening, because revealed things were always there and you simply hadn't seen them yet. When it dies, it cools. The orange fades. The frame settles to normal Centurion proportions as the residual heat dissipates from the metal. A dwarven Centurion that was nearly twice the size in life becomes, in death, just another automaton. The heat was structural, in some sense. The lava was not just where it lived, but part of what it was. Removing the heat removes whatever the centuries of immersion added, and what's left is the original machine, the thing that was placed there before the forge was abandoned and the lava had its way with it for 4,000 years. The implications of that possibility are genuinely interesting to sit with. The Dwemer are gone. They vanished in the late First Era in an event that is still debated, leaving every automaton they ever built running on original programming, tending to tasks their masters set them before an absence that was never supposed to happen. The Forgemaster was placed in the magma below the forge to guard it. Its programming has been executing for thousands of years, but programming doesn't account for what immersion in molten rock does to machinery over that length of time. The Forgemaster that rose from the lava, when you approach the forge, may not be entirely what was originally placed there. It may be something that has been changed by its own patience, by its own long vigil, by the heat slowly converting it from a machine that breathes steam into a machine that breathes fire. That drift, that slow transformation in the dark below the forge, is the kind of thing the Dwemer would find horrifying and fascinating in equal measure. It is immune to fire, which makes a certain brutal sense. A creature submerged in magma cannot be harmed by the element it has made its home. It is vulnerable to frost, which provides one of the few tactical advantages available in a fight that is otherwise about surviving a very large, very hot machine in a very enclosed space while protecting a ghost you have come to care about over the course of a long and atmospheric questline. The reward on the other side of this fight is the forge itself. You can craft one item, one piece of Ethereum equipment, chosen from 3 options, each powerful and unique. A crown that allows 2 standing stone effects simultaneously, a shield that makes struck enemies briefly ethereal, a staff that summons dwarven automatons to fight for you. These are genuinely significant rewards. But many players who play through Lost to the Ages remember the Forgemaster more than what they crafted, because the sight of that thing rising from the magma is one of those game moments that engraves itself in memory. The Ethereum itself deserves a moment of attention because it contextualizes why the Forgemaster exists at this level of power. Ethereum is not simply a valuable material. It is described in the few surviving records as a substance of extraordinary magical conductivity, mined by the Dwemer in secret from veins they discovered and kept hidden from their elven contemporaries. 4 separate dwarven cities collaborated to build the forge, an unprecedented act of cooperation among a people not given to trusting their neighbors. Each city held one shard of the key material. The forge was built to a single shared specification, and then the Dwemer disappeared, taking with them the context for what the forge was ultimately meant to produce in the quantities they were planning. What survives is the forge and its guardian, and one final use. One item, from what was clearly intended to be an industrial-scale production facility. The Forgemaster is guarding the last functional piece of an infrastructure that never got to do what it was designed to do. Its purpose is complete in the most melancholy sense. It kept its post until someone came, and now that someone has come, the post is over, and the forge will make one thing, and then stand silent for whatever comes after. Katria, watching from beside the forge, tells you to get supplies from the nearby chest and use what the Dwemer left. She has been waiting for this moment for a long time, since before her death, through years of haunting these ruins as a spirit who could not move on until the work was finished. When the Forgemaster falls and you approach the forge, she says her farewells. She has done what she came to do. Her research is vindicated. Her obsession is resolved. And somewhere in the lava below, the last guardian of the Ethereum forge continues its slow process of cooling, the orange fading from its frame, becoming bronze, becoming still, becoming just another piece of dwarven machinery that did its job in the end. The Reaper, the horror of the Soul Cairn. The Soul Cairn is the plane of oblivion belonging to the Ideal Masters, and it is one of the most unsettling places in the game to spend time in. It is a realm of trapped souls, of stolen lights drifting in the dark, of enormous crystalline structures floating above a landscape that never had a sun and never will. The Ideal Masters made a bargain with the living. Offer us a soul gem, filled, and we will help you with what you need. What the bargain did not advertise was the destination of those souls. The Soul Cairn is where they end up. It is an afterlife that was never supposed to be one. The souls here are not at peace. They wander and drift and speak in fragments, and the landscape around them is the color of a bruise that has never healed. Navigating the Soul Cairn is its own kind of disorientation. There are no landmarks in the conventional sense. The structures that dot the landscape are architecturally similar to each other, dark and angular, and the horizon offers no mountain range or coast or rising sun to orient by. The large crystals of the Ideal Masters float at irregular intervals, draining your health if you linger beneath them, which means the most distinctive visual features of the environment are actively hostile to extended examination. Players who move through the Soul Cairn on the Dawnguard main quest tend to keep moving, to stay on the path between objectives, because the alternative, stopping, exploring, investigating the structures that seem uninhabited and unimportant, costs health and time and offers, as far as the quest journal is concerned, nothing. The Soul Cairn was designed to discourage exactly the kind of patient curiosity that the Reaper requires. The fragments are hidden for the people who wander despite the cost, who look up at the crystal that is hurting them and wonder what is in the building underneath it, rather than walking away. There is no guidance to what waits in the Soul Cairn beyond the main Dawnguard questline. No journal tells you to look for the Reaper. No NPC sends you toward his lair. The only hints are the souls themselves, the wandering inhabitants of the realm who occasionally speak about something they fear, something that watches from the dark, something they refer to in fragments and never directly, because speaking its name too clearly in a realm where names have power is not something the dead are willing to risk. Shh, he's watching us, one soul will say, if you linger near them long enough, the warning quick and quiet, the eyes going elsewhere immediately after. Other fragments surface if you speak to enough of them. Something is here that even the dead are afraid of. Something moves through the Soul Cairn that is not a boneman or a mistman or any of the classified undead categories the game teaches you to expect. The path to the Reaper begins with 3 fragments. Reaper gem fragments, small and glowing, carried in chests tucked beneath the enormous floating crystals of the ideal masters that pulse above the landscape like organs. These crystals drain your health when you stand beneath them, which discourages close inspection. Most players who move through the soul cairn on the main quest do so quickly, pursuing objectives, not pausing to investigate the structures around the crystals that drain them. The fragments are there for the players who pause, who look up at the crystal and then look down at the building beneath it, and think about what a building with a chest inside might be doing in a location designed to punish proximity. 3 fragments collected across 3 separate structures, each requiring navigation of a different section of the soul cairn's disorienting architecture. When assembled, they must be brought to a specific location called the Reaper's Lair, a large black ruin along the southeastern edge of the realm, distinguishable from other structures by the presence of a door. Inside, the space is dark and barren and lit occasionally by lightning that strikes from nowhere, illuminating the jagged walls in brief, sharp flashes. In the center of the room is a pedestal. Place the 3 fragments on it. They float upward. They reassemble. The gem reforms in the air, spinning. And for a moment, the room is beautiful in the way that the soul cairn is sometimes beautiful. Dark and cold and wrong, but with a formal, terrible elegance. And then the Reaper comes. He rises not from a sarcophagus, but from the floor itself, from the bone and shadow that compose everything in this realm. A figure that is simultaneously gigantic and somehow even darker than the room around him. He wears the robes and cowl of an executioner, the hood pulled low, the face hidden, the silhouette of every execution you have ever imagined or witnessed in this game, every headsman who has ever raised an axe. His eyes are the only source of light on him, 2 points of burning red in the darkness under his hood. He carries an iron battle axe scaled to hands much larger than your own. And when he moves with a heavy, deliberate confidence of something that has been here a very long time and has never been challenged successfully. He spits a vile, acidic vapor similar to the afflicted, a corrosive spray that damages in an area. He summons bone men. He hits hard enough to remind you each time the axe connects that you are in a realm dedicated to the imprisonment of souls, and that being killed here carries implications beyond the usual death screen. The bone men that spawn with him and around him are the souls of the cairn's own population, conscripted into service, and there is something deeply wrong about that arrangement. The dead serving something that the other dead are afraid of. The economy of the soul cairn revealing itself as more complicated than it first appeared. Nobody knows what the Reaper is. The game does not explain him. There is no book in Skyrim's libraries that discusses the Reaper of the soul cairn. The ideal masters who built and maintain the realm do not acknowledge him. He drops a Daedra heart when he dies, which could imply he is Daedric in origin, something brought to the soul cairn or made from it, empowered by it, operating with or without the sanction of the ideal masters in ways that even they do not fully advertise. Some players believe he serves the masters as a collector, an enforcer, something that keeps the population of the cairn from growing unruly, or attempting what the souls here can never achieve, escape. Others believe he is something that grew out of the realm itself, a natural consequence of a space saturated with trapped spiritual energy and the grief that comes with permanent imprisonment. Neither theory is confirmed, neither is refuted. The Reaper is one of the genuinely unexplained things in Skyrim. A hole in the lore shaped exactly like something enormous with burning red eyes and an executioner's hood. And the game's decision to leave that hole unfilled is one of the most effective pieces of atmospheric mystery in either DLC. You do not understand what you have summoned. You survive it if you can. And the 3 black soul gems he drops, empty, each of them, despite being dropped by something in a realm defined by the imprisonment of souls, ask their own quiet question that the game has no interest in answering. Empty soul gems in the soul cairn. Think about that for a moment. The entire premise of the Ideal Masters and their realm is that souls fill gems, that filled gems are currency, that the economy of the place runs on captured spiritual energy. The Reaper, when he dies, leaves behind vessels designed to hold souls that hold nothing. Either he never had a soul to begin with, which supports the theory that he is something constructed rather than something killed and preserved, or he had one, and it is elsewhere, not dissipated but moved, transferred, held somewhere in the architecture of the cairn in ways that even death does not disrupt. The empty gems feel like a statement. What the statement means is the question the game hands you and then turns its back on. The bone men that fight alongside the Reaper are a detail worth examining too. Bone men are a specific category of undead native to the soul cairn. Not Draga, not regular skeletons, but something shaped by this specific plane of oblivion, carrying the environment's qualities in their form. When the Reaper summons them from the floor of his lair, rising up through the bone and grate in a way that the game describes as the floor becoming soldiers, these are not strangers he has recruited. They are constituents, residents of the realm made to fight for whatever purpose the Reaper represents. If he is an agent of the Ideal Masters, this is institutional enforcement, the realm's own population conscripted into their overseer's defense. If he is something independent of the Masters, then the soul cairn has a second power operating within it that the Ideal Masters have chosen not to acknowledge. And the question of whether they are unable to remove him or simply unwilling is one more thing the game does not answer. It is worth spending a moment with what the Ideal Masters actually are, because the Reaper makes most sense against that backdrop. According to sources as old as the game Battlespire, the Ideal Masters were once an early order of sorcerers who practiced necromancy, trafficking in souls, great, small, and fragmentary. They became so powerful that they found their physical forms limiting, transcended them by means the lore declines to specify in detail, and became beings of soul energy. They then entered oblivion and crafted the soul cairn from raw, chaotic creature as a realm suited to their purposes as soul merchants. What race they were originally, or how many distinct individuals compose the order, the sources don't clearly establish. What is clear is that they no longer have bodies, no longer manifest in any conventional sense, and relate to the world almost entirely through the crystalline structures that serve as their conduits. They created the soul cairn as a realm to house the souls they collected, and those souls are not prisoners in the way that a locked room is a prison. They are simply present, unable to leave, maintained in a state of perpetual grey existence that is neither suffering nor rest. The Ideal Masters do not torture their collection. They simply keep it. The horror is in the permanence and the purposelessness. These souls are not fuel for anything obvious. They are inventory. Into this world of grey stasis and passive accumulation, the Reaper is an anomaly. He is active, he is violent, he has an agenda. He commands bonemen who leap from the floor at his summons. He is the one thing in the soul cairn that moves with intention. And the souls of the cairn, the inventory, the passive collected dead, are afraid of him specifically, where they are not afraid of the Ideal Masters themselves. That is the detail that matters most. The architects of this realm, the owners of this collection, do not generate fear in the people they own. Something that simply passes through generates terror. Whatever the Reaper is, he operates on a different principle than the system around him, and the souls know it, and the ideal masters have chosen not to explain it to anyone who comes looking. Haknir Death-Brand, King of the Ghosts. Solstheim keeps its oldest stories under the sand and ash, and the story of Haknir Death-Brand is one of the oldest and strangest it has. He was a pirate. He was a king of pirates. He sailed the Sea of Ghosts in the northern waters above Tamriel with a crew that followed him out of terror rather than loyalty, in a Stalrim armor that gleamed like frozen light, wielding twin scimitars whose names, Bloodscythe and Soulrender, were not metaphors. He wasn't the kind of pirate who writes his own legend as he goes, embellishing and softening the worst of it. The worst of it was the point. The book Death-Brand exists in Solstheim's libraries in the present day of the Fourth Era, and it reads like a horror story that is simultaneously in love with its subject. Haknir Death-Brand was known for rages and fits of madness. He delighted in torture and murder for its own sake. His crew trembled in his presence. He lived an unnaturally long life, long enough that the rumors could not agree on how he had managed it. Some said he sustained himself on the souls and blood of his victims. Some said he made a pact with Mehrunes Dagon, the Daedric Prince of Destruction, and that the terrible scar across his face, a wound that never healed, that never would heal, was the seal of that pact. The scar became his name. Haknir Death-Brand, the pirate who wore his deal with a Daedric prince across his face as a permanent advertisement. What is striking about the book's tone is that it does not condemn him cleanly. It describes his atrocities with the slightly awed distance of someone recounting a natural disaster. Something terrible, certainly, but terrible in a way that inspires a particular kind of respect. The Sea of Ghosts is not a gentle place. The waters north of Tamriel are cold and treacherous and peopled with sailors who are hard by necessity. A pirate king who ruled those waters for what the legend implies was a very long time was not simply violent. He was violent enough and capable enough and frightening enough that he sustained an operation in some of the most hostile maritime territory in the known world. The crew was afraid, but they were there. They followed him. There is something in that which the book acknowledges without quite praising, a grudging recognition that effectiveness at its most extreme is its own kind of legend. As death approached, because even unnaturally long lives end eventually, he called his crew together and announced that none of them were worthy to inherit what he had built. Not his ships, not his treasure, not his twin scimitars, not his Stalrim armor. None of them. They had served him in terror, and he had found them uniformly insufficient. He cursed the armor. He cursed the scimitars. His decree, delivered to men who were afraid to argue, was that only someone capable of defeating him in combat could claim these things, and until such a person existed, the treasure would wait. His quartermaster, a man named Garruk Windrime, was ordered to take the armor pieces to 4 separate locations on the coast of Solstheim, each marked on a map, each hidden in a buried chest. Garruk did this. He was then destroyed by the cursed helm. The legend suggests he went mad from it, and what happened to him is recorded in the rumor of his screams on certain moonlit nights near the shore where the first chest was buried. That detail about Garruk deserves attention. He was the most trusted member of a crew that feared Haknir universally, trusted enough to be given the final task of hiding the armor. He survived Haknir long enough to complete that task. And then the helm took him. The curse was not dormant or passive. It was active, working against the man who touched it, punishing proximity rather than rewarding it. His screams on moonlit nights are not a ghost story tacked on for flavor. They suggest the curse outlasted its maker, which, if the legends about a pact with Mehrunes Dagon hold any truth, would make a grim kind of sense. Daedric arrangements do not expire cleanly when the mortal who made them dies. What Haknir arranged, if those legends are accurate, was not a treasure chest with a trap. It was a test monitored by power that operates on a longer timetable than any mortal plan. Inside Gildenhall Barrow, just inside the entrance, the dead adventurer and his note serve a similar function to Sarden's journal on Hawker Island. This was a person who got close, who found the entrance, who had the map or the rumour or the determination to make it to the door. He lasted long enough to notice the draft from behind the Stalrim deposit, which means he was perceptive enough to look past the obvious surfaces. But he lacked the specific tool, the ancient Nordic pickaxe, that would have let him act on what he noticed. He barricaded himself in the antechamber, waited for the danger outside to pass, studied the wall, understood that something was behind it, and died without ever reaching it. His note is a gift to the player who reads it, an arrow pointing at the exact solution without stating it outright. This is Bethesda's environmental storytelling at its most considerate. The game teaching you what you need to know through the failure of someone who came before, honoring that failure with enough detail to make it useful. Haknir sailed to Gildenhall Barrow on the eastern coast of Solstheim, on Hawker Island, with his helmsman Tharlin Ebonhand, and sealed himself inside. He lay down among his treasure in the lower chamber and allowed the door to be locked from the outside. He was not dying so much as waiting. The curse he placed on the armor and the scimitars was a challenge extended across time, a king refusing to be past tense, insisting that his legacy remain conditional on someone worthwhile enough to claim it. You find the first thread of this in one of two ways, either by reading the book Death-Brand, which appears in several locations across Solstheim and triggers the associated quest when read, or by stumbling onto Haknir's Shoal, a small camp on the northeastern coast where modern pirates have found what they believe is a treasure map. If you approach carefully, you can hear them talking. One is excited, one is nervous, referencing a curse with the specific anxiety of someone who doesn't entirely believe in curses, but is not entirely sure he should ignore this one either. Their camp sits over a half-buried chest with an expert-level lock, and inside that chest is the first piece of Haknir's armor, the helm, and the map to the rest. The hunt for the armor takes you around Solstheim in a widening spiral, each piece in a different environment. Coastal beach, ash wastes, rocky cliff face, mountain trail. Each location is guarded by something. Pirates, ash spawn, reeklings. Each chest requires a lockpick and a high enough skill to use it. The armor comes together piece by piece, and each piece is powerful on its own, but together, each piece stacked against the others. The Death-Brand armor becomes something more than the sum of its parts, the enchantments compounding in ways that make it one of the best light armor sets in the game. The fourth and final piece contains a key, the key to Gildenhall Barrow. The barrow's entrance is on the northwest shore of Hawker Island, the same island as Lord Tusk, and getting inside requires either picking a master-level lock or using the key you found. Inside, the first room contains what appears to be a dead adventurer who got as far as the lobby and no further. His note explaining that he found himself trapped by bandits outside and barricaded in, and that while waiting, he noticed a faint draft from behind one of the two Stalrim deposits that flanked the inner door. He had a pickaxe, but not the right kind. He never made it through. This small tragedy, this note left by someone who almost got there, is the kind of Bethesda environmental storytelling that rewards reading. He spent his last hours in the antechamber of a pirate king's tomb, feeling the cold breath from the secret behind the wall. An ancient Nordic pickaxe lets you mine through the Stalrim. Beyond it is a treasure room that genuinely deserves the name. Piles of gold scattered on the floor in arrangements that suggest deliberate display, rather than accumulation, gems and weapons and potions in quantities that make clear this was not a hiding place, but a statement. Haknir did not hide his wealth. He entombed it, presented it, arranged it to be impressive for the person eventually worthy of finding it. Through the treasure room, through the final door, is the lower chamber, and there is Haknir's skeleton, lying among its things, dressed in nothing because the armor is with you now, the last piece claimed, and the curse presumably active. Behind the skeleton, lodged against the far wall, is a scimitar, blood scythe. Pick it up. He rises immediately, not as a Draugr, not as a simple undead. The game treats Haknir as a living creature, which is a classification distinction with meaningful implications. He is not the restless dead. He is the cursed and impatient, a man who arranged his own not quite death specifically to be woken by this moment. He materializes with his crew, the ghostly forms of Garruk and Thalin flanking him, the men he took with him into this tomb still serving their king even in death. He phases in and out of visibility during the fight, disappearing and reappearing, which is either tactical genius or the specific movement pattern of something that has been semi-present for centuries and no longer commits entirely to being physically located in one place. The fight itself has a quality that distinguishes it from most boss encounters in the game. Haknir is fast in a way that larger enemies rarely are. He does not telegraph his attacks with the slow wind-up of a Draugr Deathlord or the mechanical precision of a dwarven centurion. He fights like a pirate, which is to say he fights dirty, closing distance quickly, striking opportunistically, withdrawing before you can return the hit. His crew adds to the chaos in ways that feel intentional. Garruk and Thalin were real people, name people, the specific subordinates who served their king to the last and are still serving him now. Dispatching them feels different from clearing generic ghost enemies precisely because their names are in the historical record. They were real. They chose to be here. The curse that preserved them was not simply Haknir's power over his own death. It was his power over theirs. When he dies, when you deliver the last blow and he collapses, you can loot from his remains the second scimitar, Soul Render. Blood Scythe and Soul Render, used together, form a paired weapon system. Their enchantments amplify each other, lower the enemy's magicka resistance, weaken their armor, absorb health and magicka simultaneously. They were designed to function together by a man who understood that the most dangerous things in combat are the ones that take from you as they damage you, that drain your capacity to respond as they reduce your capacity to survive. The scimitars are, in this sense, Haknir made mechanical. His philosophy of domination through depletion, built into steel and enchantment, and handed to whoever proved themselves worthy of holding it. The quest ends there. Haknir's pronouncement, centuries old, is resolved. Someone was worthy. The inheritance is paid. What happens to the ghost of a pirate king who spent centuries guarding a conditional legacy after the condition is finally met is a question the game doesn't answer. And that silence is fitting. He was a story waiting for a conclusion. The conclusion came. Stories, at their end, go quiet. The Ebony Warrior's final vigil. There is something in Skyrim that hunts you. Not in the way that dragons hunt, not in the way that assassins hunt, not as a threat or an obstacle. It hunts you the way a resolution hunts a story, with patience, with the certainty of arrival, with a kind of wait that only comes when something has been waiting a very long time. At level 80, in any major city in Skyrim, a man in black armor will find you. He will not be difficult to miss. He is tall, uniquely tall as Tsun, the guardian of Sovngarde, a height that gives the conversation a faint quality of theatre, as if the scale of the encounter is announcing itself through the dimensions of the person delivering it. He wears a full set of ebony armor, each piece enchanted with a thoroughness that tells you he has been preparing for this for years. He carries an ebony sword that absorbs health with every strike. He carries an ebony bow that can paralyze. He has an ebony shield that suppresses fire. His gauntlets increase his weapon damage. His boots resist frost. His helmet lets him breathe underwater, which is either tactical preparation or a detail from a life that included things most players never think to ask about. He is a Redguard. His face is calm. His voice, when he speaks to you in the middle of whatever city street or market square this meeting happens to occur on, is not threatening in the way that people who are trying to threaten you sound. He is stating facts. I have done all that can be done, he says. There is nothing left. No quest to be undertaken. No villains to be slain. No challenges to face. Except for you. You are my last challenge. Only you can send me to Sovngarde with honor. Make your preparations. When you are ready, come find me at my last vigil. And then he waits. The last vigil is a camp northeast of Fort Greenwall, high in the Veloti Mountains on the eastern edge of Skyrim. It is not a fortress or a temple or any kind of grand stage. It is a campsite, a fire, a bedroll, the equipment of a man who has been living simply in a cold mountain pass while waiting for an appointment that only he knew was coming. When you arrive, he does not speak. He stands with his sword drawn, his posture not aggressive but ready, the way a man who has done this many, many times stands when he is about to do it, one final time. Combat begins when you attack. You have to throw the first blow. The campsite is worth pausing at before the fight begins, because it tells you something. There is a bedroll, which means he has been sleeping here. There is fire-making equipment. There is nothing else. No food stores, no books, no trophies from previous battles, no correspondence, no evidence of a life that included anything beyond the immediate present of waiting for you. He stripped his existence down to the irreducible minimum. Somewhere to sleep, warmth, and the armor he arrived in. This is not the camp of a man who plans to return somewhere else. He has made peace with the mountain pass. He has made peace, it seems, with everything prior to this moment, and what he is left with is a very clean and very final appointment. His armor tells a different story, one of extraordinary investment and decades of preparation. Every piece is enchanted specifically. The helmet allows him to breathe underwater, which is not a combat enchantment, which means he has been somewhere, or expected to go somewhere, where that would matter. Underwater ruins, sunken Nordic tombs, the chilled lakes of Skyrim's wilderness. The armor regenerates health. The boots resist frost. The gauntlets amplify weapon damage. He is not wearing equipment assembled for a single dramatic duel. He is wearing equipment assembled for a life, a long and varied and thorough life of encounters that required exactly these preparations. When you take his armor after the fight, if you take it, you are taking the material record of everywhere he has ever been. The sword he carries, an ebony blade with a vampiric enchantment that absorbs health with each strike, is perhaps the most telling piece. He is not fighting with a trophy or a keepsake. He's fighting with a weapon designed to sustain him through prolonged combat, to turn attrition against his opponents, to keep him alive by making his enemies less alive. This is a warrior who has thought carefully about how to keep winning when the fight goes long. He chose this weapon for the same reason he chose the armor. Not for what it means, but for what it does. He is, even here at the end, a practical man who has outsurvived everything through the application of systematic excellence to the problem of staying alive. His arsenal in that fight is extraordinary. He uses unrelenting force, which means a dragonborn fighting him will have their own weapon turned back on them in spirit. The signature ability of the Dovahkiin appearing in the hands of a warrior who is no dragonborn himself, who learned it through methods the game never explains. He casts close wounds to heal himself mid-battle. He summons Storm Atronax, though a particular quirk of his spell absorption perk means this often fails, the magic collapsing back into him rather than manifesting. He uses Frostcloak. He uses Iron Flesh to harden his armor. He has a perk that reflects a portion of physical damage back on the attacker, which means power attacks against him carry a literal risk of killing yourself with your own strength. Every approach has a cost. Every strategy has a counter. The fact that he can use unrelenting force, the Thu'um, is perhaps the single most interesting detail about him. The voice is described throughout Skyrim's lore as something that requires either the soul of a dragon, which is what makes the Dragonborn uniquely capable, or decades of meditation and training under the Greybeards, who dedicate their lives to the practice. The Ebony Warrior is neither a Dragonborn nor, as far as anyone can determine, a student of the Greybeards. The game leaves no record of him passing through High Hrothgar. He is simply a man who, through a life spent pushing the boundaries of what a warrior can achieve, arrived at a place where the voice was part of his skill set. This is either an oversight, or it is the game's most direct statement about what the ceiling of mortal achievement actually looks like. That someone who spent long enough in pursuit of mastery might reach things that are theoretically reserved for the specially born. He is level 80, which makes him one of the highest level named characters in the base game, and Dragonborn combined. Lower than Karstaag, lower than Arngir and Mirak, but higher than virtually every other nameable, killable entity in Skyrim. And he exists specifically at level 80, because you must be level 80 for him to appear. He scales with the player not through mechanical scaling, but through threshold. He does not exist in the game until you are precisely the thing he claims you are. The only challenge worth the effort. The theological question around the Ebony Warrior is genuinely complex, and it is one of the most thoughtful pieces of ambient lore Bethesda introduced in the Dragonborn DLC. He is a Redguard. Sovngarde is the Nordic afterlife, the Hall of Shore, the realm where Nord warriors feast and compete and wait in the amber light of a paradise built specifically for a specific people and their specific spiritual tradition. Redguards have their own afterlife, a place called the Far Shores, administered by their own god, Tuwaka. By every conventional understanding of how the afterlife systems work in Tamrielic cosmology, a Redguard should not be requesting entrance to Sovngarde. It is not his destination. But here is a compelling thread in the Elder Scrolls universe's philosophy, one the series has returned to across multiple installments. Belief has genuine metaphysical weight in Tamriel. Reality, in the TES cosmology, is not fixed. It responds to sufficient conviction, bends toward what is sufficiently believed by sufficiently powerful people. Whether that principle extends to the destination of individual souls after death is a genuine, open question, but it seems worth asking here. A Redguard who devoted his entire life to a warrior tradition outside his own culture, who learned the Thu'um, who says, "At last, Sovngarde," as the death blow lands. This could be a man who believed himself toward different possibilities than he was born into. The sincerity is evident in everything about him. The Far Shores, the Redguard afterlife, is administered by Tawaka, a god whose portfolio is the peaceful transition of souls, guiding the dead to their destination, keeping the path clear against the interference of Sep, the chaos deity who tries to entrap souls in endless wandering. The Far Shores are described as a realm of rest and continuation, a place without the eternal feasting and combat of Sovngarde, more contemplative than celebratory. For a warrior who has structured his entire identity around the Nordic tradition of dying gloriously in the act of meeting a worthy opponent, the Far Shores may have seemed insufficient. Not because they are lesser, they are not, but because they are wrong for who he chose to be. He may have spent his entire life making choices that pointed him toward a different ending, and the sincerity of that pointing may, in a universe where belief shapes metaphysical reality, have been enough to redirect the destination. Sun, the guardian of Sovngarde, tests those who would enter, asking them to prove worthiness through combat, to demonstrate that they belong in the Hall of Heroes. The Ebony Warrior, had he arrived at Sovngarde's Mistshore, would have passed that test without question. Whether he arrived is another matter. But the architecture of his entire life was preparation for exactly that kind of accounting. He was, above everything else, someone who understood that worthiness must be demonstrated and not merely claimed, and who arranged his death accordingly. Whether he gets there is something the game refuses to confirm. He does not appear in Sovngarde if you go there later. But Sovngarde contains only a fraction of those who should logically be present, and the absence of a soul in a divine realm you visited briefly on the way to fight a world-eating dragon is not, the community has long argued, definitive evidence of where that soul ended up. Maybe he is in the Far Shores. Maybe Shore found him worthy regardless of his bloodline. Maybe the question of where he went is less important than the question of whether a man who was willing to die beautifully on his own terms at the hands of the most worthy opponent he could find managed in that last second of light to go exactly where he wanted to go. When you leave the last vigil after he falls, there is no ceremony. His body cools. His fire goes out. The mountains around the camp are as cold and vast as they have always been. You go back to the world, carrying what you looted from him and something else, something harder to name. The weight of having been, for someone, the answer to the only question they had left. Ahzidal, the embittered destroyer. In the southeastern ash wastes of Solstheim, between Raven Rock and the ruins along the coast, a Dunmer treasure hunter named Rallis Sedaris has set up a small camp beside a mound of ash and rubble. He is standing at the edge of what appears to be absolutely nothing, a depression in the grey landscape, and if you speak to him, he will tell you, with the specific enthusiasm of someone who has been alone with their obsession for too long, that beneath the ash is a barrow, an ancient Nordic barrow buried by the eruption of Red Mountain more than 2 centuries ago, and inside it something remarkable waits. He needs help funding the excavation. 1,000 gold pieces to start. What Rallis does not tell you, because Rallis does not know, is that the barrow already knows you are coming. Ahzidal is a name that translates from the dragon language as the Embittered Destroyer, and it is a name he chose for himself. which tells you something about both the man and the moment in which the man stopped being one. He was born in Sarthal, the first Nordic city, in the late Merethic era, in the age before recorded history, when men and elves shared Tamriel's surface in an arrangement that was always hostile and ended, predictably, in blood. His gift for magic was evident to his tutors when he was young, and his talent grew beyond what any of them could teach him, which is the kind of gift that is sometimes more burden than blessing. He left his home. He left his wife and his child. He went to find elven teachers who could take him further, and he found them, and he studied under them for years and learned things that no Nord had ever learned before. He was, by the time he finished, possibly the first human to have genuinely mastered elven enchanting methods. The first in all of history. He came home to Ash. The Snow Elves had sacked Sarthal while he was gone. Everyone he had known, his wife, his child, the tutors who had first recognized what he could do, the community that had shaped him before he outgrew it, was dead or missing. The city reduced to the ruin that still exists in Skyrim's northwest. The same ruin the player explores during the College of Winterhold questline. He stood in the ash of his birthplace and made a decision that consumed the rest of his very long life. He renamed himself Ahzidal, the Embittered Destroyer. He swore an oath of vengeance. He was going to use everything he had learned, everything he had taken from those elven teachers, to destroy them. The specific cruelty of his situation is worth sitting with. He left Sarthal to become more powerful. He left to learn from elven masters, and he returned to find that elven hands had destroyed everything he left behind. The knowledge he gained from those teachers is the same knowledge he eventually weaponized against elven cities. He could not have known, while studying under one group of elves, that another would burn his home. But what the tragedy did to him was collapse that distinction entirely. All Mer became the enemy, the knowledge became the weapon, and the tools of learning became instruments of revenge. There is a closed, horrible loop in Ahzidal's biography that the book about him, Ahzidal's Descent, traces with the bleak interest of a scholar examining a life that went catastrophically wrong. Ahzidal's Descent is the in-game book that summarizes his arc, and it is available in Tel Mithrin and at High Point Tower on Solstheim. Its author, Halland Greycloak, describes Ahzidal's transformation from gifted student to dragon priest to something that even the dragon priests eventually cast out, and the tone throughout is one of genuine tragedy rather than simple condemnation. Greycloak understands that Ahzidal was not born into what he became. He was shaped by a specific sequence of events, each one logical given the previous, the decisions compounding in the way that grief compounded with power tends to compound. The book is, in its quiet way, one of the most sophisticated character studies in Skyrim's lore. A man whose potential was extraordinary, whose love for his family was real, and who turned both into instruments of a hatred that eventually consumed the love and left only the potential aimed at destruction. What followed was a life of increasingly obsessive accumulation. From the Dwemer, he learned the 7 natures of metal and how to harmonize them in enchanted construction. From the Aelids, he learned ancient runes and the magic of first light. He sought out the Snow Elves, the Chimer, the Altmer. Every elven culture that had something he could take, he found and studied and took from. He was not a student. He was a collector. He was building an arsenal. And when Ysgramor returned from Atmora with 500 companions to reclaim Sarthal, Ahzidal was there, ready, with enchantments that turned the companions into something that cut through the elven defenders like something the battlefield had never seen before. His oath was fulfilled. He had made himself useful to vengeance. But vengeance, once achieved, leaves a void where it used to live. And Ahzidal filled that void the way obsessive people fill voids, with more knowledge, more power, more hunger for what he did not yet have. He sought the secrets of the dragons. He became a dragon priest. He was gifted an ebony mask by his dragon overlord and given power over fire that expanded his already formidable capabilities. And still, it wasn't enough. He reached into the plains of oblivion, seeking the secrets of the Daedric princes. That reach, finally, was what broke him. What he brought back from oblivion gave him power and gave him madness in the same handful, and he was exiled by his fellow dragon priests for what he had become. He aligned himself with Miraak, the first dragonborn, who had already betrayed his dragon masters to serve Hermaeus Mora, and was gathering his own acolyte priests, and became one of 3 dragon priests who served Miraak as his most powerful subordinates. When Miraak's rebellion provoked the dragon cult's retaliation, both fled to Solstheim together. Miraak's defeat came at the hands of Varlock, and Hermaeus Mora snatched him into Apocrypha before the killing blow could land, trapping him there. With Miraak gone, the dragon cult sealed Ahzidal within Kolbiorn Barrow, locked away with the relics of his long life. The eruption of Red Mountain buried him for another 200 years. The quest unearthed spans 4 separate visits to Kolbiorn Barrow, each funded by you, each costing increasingly large amounts of gold. 1,000, then 2,000, then 3,000, then 5,000. A total investment of 11,000 gold to unearth what Rallis keeps insisting is worth finding. The miners die. They die each time, the Draga beneath the ash waking as the excavation progresses, the magic of the barrow protecting its inhabitant against intrusion. Rallis keeps hiring more workers. He keeps sending letters asking you to come deal with the new wave. He keeps offering explanations that become less convincing with each visit. Something is directing the Draga. Something is using Rallis as an instrument. The 4th letter arrives as a summons, and you return to find a massacre. The miners are all dead, arranged by force rather than defense. The bodies positioned in ways that suggest ritual rather than battle. Rallis is in the deepest chamber, standing in the middle of a summoning circle. His movement's wrong, too deliberate, too focused. Not the movement of a man who came up with this on his own. Ahzidal has been using him since the beginning. The mind of the dragon priest, sealed in the barrow but never entirely contained, reached out through the ash and found a willing enough instrument in a treasure hunter motivated by greed and loneliness, and has been directing the excavation from below, using Rallis's hands and your gold to fund his own resurrection. What happens to Rallis during Ahzidal's influence is worth considering carefully. He does not have the look of someone who has been tortured or broken down into compliance. He has the look of someone who has been slowly convinced, the kind of influence that works by finding what a person already wants and quietly amplifying it, filling in the gaps between their ambition and their conscience with rationalizations that feel, from the inside, like their own thinking. Rallis wanted to make a discovery. He wanted credit. He wanted the fortune that the excavation implied. Ahzidal did not need to create those desires. He needed only to maintain them past the point where a person with clearer judgment might have walked away. The miners who died were the cost of Rallis's continued self-deception. And Rallis, when the spell breaks, has to live with having provided the labor and the cover story for all of it. The fight with Ahzidal is a masterclass in fire magic. He uses a unique version of fire breath called Fire Stream. Sustained, precise, punishing in a way that standard fire spells are not. He reanimates the Draugr in his chamber, and when those Draugr die, others wake to replace them. He has the eternal quality of Dragon Priests, that specific combination of resilience and power that made them the ruling caste of an ancient empire, and his mask, Ahzidal, radiates fire damage protection and amplifies fire spells in a way that makes him particularly brutal against anyone relying on magic. His use of fire is a fitting irony in a life defined by painful inversions. He devoted himself to enchanting, the discipline of binding power into objects, of creating persistent effects that outlast the caster. He became a dragon priest partly because dragons commanded the study of their language as reality, because the Thu'um was the most fundamental form of enchanting, words that changed the world directly rather than through the mediation of a gem or a weapon. And the element his mask amplifies, the element his fire stream expresses, is the same element that destroyed Sathor. Fire ended his first life. Fire became his weapon in the long life that followed. Whether there is design in that symmetry, or only the dark coincidence of a career built on grief, it is hard not to read Ahzidal as a creature whose entire existence was shaped by a single act of burning, and who in turn burned everything he touched. When he falls, Rallis comes back to himself. He claims he had no control over what happened, that Ahzidal was guiding his hands throughout the entire excavation. You can kill him for the lives lost under his watch, or you can spare him, accepting that a dragon priest's influence over a single mortal treasurer is not something most people are equipped to resist. If you spare him, Rallis becomes a follower, quiet and haunted, in the way of people who have been used as instruments of something they don't fully understand. He will follow you across Skyrim. The man who spent 11,000 of your gold pieces opening a tomb he had no idea was already open from the inside. The relics of Ahzidal scattered throughout the barrow. The boots that let you walk on water. The gauntlets that redirect spell energy. The ring that makes reanimated servants explode. The ring that lets you cast Ignite and Freeze are all pieces of the same biography. The life's work of a man who turned a personal catastrophe into the most thorough self-improvement program in Nordic history. They do not make what he became heroic. They make it comprehensible, and that comprehension is more unsettling than simple villainy would be. There is a question the quest unearthed never stops posing, even after it ends. You funded this. 11,000 gold pieces across 4 installments, each one following a letter from a man whose handwriting grew increasingly erratic, whose explanations became less credible, whose casual mentions of the miners' deaths became more casual with each visit. You paid for the excavation that freed Ahzidal. You provided the resources that enabled the Dragon Priest to pull Rallis' strings toward the moment of release. The game allows you to spare Rallis and recruit him as a follower, and many players do, interpreting his victimhood as genuine. But the sequence of your own choices leading up to the final chamber, 11,000 gold, 4 letters ignored as alarm bells, a willingness to keep investing in something that kept killing everyone involved with it, raises a less comfortable question about who bears responsibility for what happened in Kolbiorn Barrow. Ahzidal was sealed in the ash for 200 years. Someone helped dig him out. The game lets you be that someone without quite accusing you of it, which is one of the more quietly sophisticated moral structures in the DLC. Krosis and the Mountain of Two Battles. There is a place in the mountains northeast of Whiterun called Shearpoint, and the game will tell you almost nothing about it unless you go looking. No NPC sends you there directly. No main quest thread passes through the high peaks of the Pale in that specific direction. A hold guard might mention it in passing, the way guards mention things. Half a sentence, a shrug, the implication that something is up there that people don't talk about much. If you follow the path northwest past Felglow Keep and climb the long switchback that eventually opens into the summit, what you find there is one of the most concentrated encounters in Skyrim. A word wall, a dragon, and a dragon priest sealed in a sarcophagus directly in front of the wall, waiting for anyone who approaches with the specific patience of things that have been waiting since the first era and have learned not to rush. The dragon priest is Krosis, and his name means sorrow, or sorry, or my apologies, in the dragon language. The Draugr, who sometimes mutter in their ancient tongue, say Unslad Krosis, eternal sorrow, as they push through the dark of their tombs. Dying Death Lords whisper it. Paarthurnax, when he is explaining something about the difficulty of choice or the weight of history, uses the word to acknowledge burdens that cannot be set down. That Krosis the Dragon Priest carries this word as his identity suggests something about what his long entombment has made of him, or perhaps about what he was always. He emerges from the sarcophagus at the base of the word wall with the deliberate speed of someone who has done this exactly once and is doing it for the first time. The ancient ritual of rising from stone sleep working through his body as the cold air of the mountain reaches him. He carries a staff of fireballs despite being categorized as a frost-based priest, a combination that creates a kind of unpredictability in the fight. You have prepared for frost and he opens with fire, and by the time you adjust, his frost cloak is active, and you are managing two elemental threats at once. He moves with unusual speed for a dragon priest, floating and strafing across the summit at a rate that makes targeting him with ranged magic difficult. A constant lateral shift that means most projectile spells miss slightly off to one side. The dragon, if it is present, if you have progressed far enough into the main quest for dragons to be walking the world again, turns Sheerpoint's summit into one of the most genuinely punishing optional encounters in the base game. You are on a mountain. The wind would be audible if there were anything on this mountain that cared about wind. The word wall hums with the power of what it contains, and you are fighting both a level dragon and an ancient priest simultaneously, each requiring different tactical responses, each capable of killing you independently, while the other pursues its own objectives. The dragon wants your soul. Krosis wants to defend his wall. The battlefield is narrow and cold and provides very little cover. The word wall at Sheerpoint is the only wall in the game that teaches all three words of a single shout in one visit. Most word walls offer one word, requiring multiple separate visits to different locations across Skyrim to assemble the complete shout. Sheerpoint gives you everything at once. The shout is throw voice, the ability to project your shout to a distant location, making enemies search in the wrong direction, useful for stealth players and genuinely irreplaceable for certain tactical approaches. The fact that a complete shout is available here, in full, in a single encounter, suggests that Bethesda considered this summit important enough to reward completely. Sheerpoint is not a minor location. It was designed to be a destination. Throw voice is an unusual shout to guard with so much difficulty. Most of Skyrim's shouts are straightforwardly destructive or protective. They kill things, stop time, drain armor, cool storms. Throw voice is deceptive. It is a shout specifically designed to make something appear where it is not, to redirect attention, to win encounters through misdirection rather than force. It is the shout you need when you do not want to be found. When you want something to look one way while you come from another, it is, in the inventory of dragon shouts, the one that values intelligence over power. And it sits at the top of a mountain guarded by a dragon priest, who himself carries a mask enchanting lockpicking, archery, and alchemy. The skills of someone who enters places carefully, strikes from distance, and prepares for encounters rather than simply walking into them. But the mountain also poses a specific navigational challenge that adds to the feeling of earning what's at the top. Sheerpoint is not marked on most players' early maps. Getting there requires either knowing where to look and following a path that circles around behind Felglow Keep, or simply heading northeast from Whiterun until the terrain pushes you upward. There is no road to the summit. The last section is open mountain face. Switchbacking through rock and thin air, and the word wall becomes audible, that deep harmonic chanting that indicates a wall's proximity, before Sheerpoint becomes visible. You hear it before you see it. You are climbing toward the sound. And when you crest the last ridge and the summit opens in front of you, with the dragons circling if you progressed far enough, and the coffin of Krosis sitting directly in front of the humming wall, the scale of what you've climbed to reach feels entirely appropriate to what the encounter demands. When Krosis falls and his mask can be looted from his ashes, the enchantments on it tell a secondary story about who he was in life. The mask of Krosis improves lockpicking by 20%, archery by 20%, and alchemy by 20%. These are the skills of a specific kind of person. Not a pure mage or a pure warrior, but someone who moved carefully through the world, who opened things others had locked, who gathered and combined components into effects, who hit from distance rather than engaging at close range. A dragon priest who prioritized precision over force in a system built around the worship of dragons who valued power above all else. What that combination meant for who Krosis was within the dragon cult, what role those particular skills played in the ancient hierarchy of the First Era. The game leaves these questions open. The mask sits in the collection of 8 named dragon priest masks that are distributed across Skyrim's landscape, each guarding a separate shrine, each named with a word from the dragon language. The 8 can be assembled and placed on a special shrine in Labyrinthian, a moment that serves as a kind of coda to the entire collection effort. A quiet acknowledgement that you found them all, that you climbed every mountain and cleared every tomb, that you were thorough. Krosis is the most exposed of the 8, the only one on an open mountain summit, with no dungeon entrance to frame the encounter. He's simply up there in the cold, sealed in stone, waiting under the mountain sky with the patience of something that is not particularly troubled by how long it has to wait. His name means sorrow. He stands on a mountain where the wind would howl if anyone were listening for it. He sleeps in a sarcophagus carved at the foot of a word wall, and the word the wall carries is about misdirection, about making things look for you in the wrong place. There is a metaphor available here if you want one. The priests who served the dragons gave their lives to the cult, sealed themselves away to serve as eternal guardians, traded their humanity for power and their future for vigilance. What remains of that trade, ages later, is sorrow and stone, and the echoing hum of power that no longer has anyone to use it for the purpose it was made. The dragon priests of Skyrim occupy a unique theological position in the game's lore. They were not born to their power, not gifted it by divine lottery. They earned it in the way that truly terrible bargains are earned, by giving up everything ordinary about a human life in exchange for something that would outlast any ordinary human life. The priests who served the ancient dragons in the Merethic era were the most powerful mortals on Tamriel. They administered the dragon cult, enforced the will of their draconic masters over a population of humans who had not yet learned to push back, maintained the infrastructure of an empire built on breath and bone, and the dominion of creatures that had been old when men were new. They were rewarded with magic beyond what any independent scholar could accumulate, and with the specific kind of immortality that comes from being sealed in your own tomb, while your consciousness persists in the waiting dark. Krosis waited for someone to come. He always was going to wait. The deal he made with the dragon cult's power structure stipulated this kind of vigilance, and the part of him that is still the priest rather than the Draugr keeps his post even after the culture that gave him his purpose has been dead for longer than most civilizations have existed. What he is guarding at this point is primarily the fact of his own presence. The wall behind him will teach anyone who approaches. The power in it belongs to whoever can claim it. He is not protecting the word. He is the obstacle that determines who gets it, the filter through which the Thu'um selects its next keeper. That he dies in that process is not, in the world of dragon priests, a tragedy. It is the function. When you walk away from Sheerpoint with his mask and the full shout and the memory of the fight at the top of the climb, the summit is quiet. The dragon is gone in the way that dragons go, absorbed into you, the soul of it added to whatever it is you are becoming. Krosis is ash. The word wall does not require a guardian anymore. The cold is the same cold it has always been, the specific cold of high places that do not warm even in summer. And below the mountain, the rest of Skyrim goes on without knowing what just happened up here. The way the rest of Skyrim always goes on, indifferent and enormous, leaving each small story to resolve itself on whatever mountain it climbed to reach its end. The path down from Sheerpoint is the same path you climbed, which is a small thing but a true one. You leave the same way you arrived, through the same switchbacks and the same thin air, carrying the mask and the shout and the absorbed soul, and the mountain does not acknowledge any of it. This is one of Skyrim's quieter truths, one that Sheerpoint demonstrates more clearly than most locations simply because of its isolation. The world does not change when you do something significant. The mountain was here before you. It will be here after. The rocks and the cold and the empty sky above Sheerpoint have absorbed the deaths of dragons and the sealing of dragon priests and whatever else has happened on this summit since the Merethic era. And they keep none of the record, show none of the weight. You changed. The mountain didn't. And the walk down, through the cold and the thin air, is the game asking you to carry your own significance without the landscape validating it for you.